So welcome, Helen. I'm really pleased to have you here today.
Thanks, Amy. It's such a treat to be here. I've been listening to a lot of your previous podcast guests and finding everyone's stories fascinating. So I'm looking forward to chatting today.
You've managed to kind of do something actually that I think people find really complex, like going from financial services into communications and now kind of on your own journey. That's quite difficult for people. We talk quite a lot about trying to identify transferable skills and using your network and all of those things to have like this thing that maybe describe as like career ability, so you can be agile yourself in different stuff.
So, yeah, I mean, the career journey always sounds so neat and linear and progressive when you hear about it in one sort of sitting, but it's the actual part is a lot more messy, I think, as we all know. Made the move at that stage from financial services into communication. And then had a thriving career in communication. I very quickly found my way into strategy, which is really the heart of where the understanding of consumers and people lies. But, in time, that everything has its chapter and everything runs its course. And I did strategy within communication for many years. And then that has also reached its point of maturity. So I would say over the last couple of years, it's been a slower evolution, but I've definitely tended more now to want to explore new work and create a new chapter in the space of personal development and team development. So it's something that's grown alongside me as I've worked in management of agencies, but more firmly and overtly, I'd say, since I started studying coaching, got my coaching qualification. So I've been in the last couple of years practicing as a coach alongside running a business. And that's been wonderful. And I want to build more and more of the coaching. Pretty much started out in completely the wrong direction, always. I think growing up, I was never really sure what I wanted to do, but I had lots of ideas that were all very different from each other. But I think what they had in common was a love of people, a love of understanding systems, a love of creativity. But when I finished school, I went and studied business. And I think what was happening for me is I was much more at that stage externally directed than inner directed, and ended up, interestingly, choosing something that has served me. So, I think that nothing's ever wasted, and I've drawn a lot from having studied business. But it, with the benefit of hindsight, wasn't something that I particularly connected with. And I think my journey since then has really been one of reconnecting to who I am and what I want to be doing, and reconnecting to purpose.
That bit about that you said about going down a path that you didn't really want to go down or realize maybe afterwards, what do you think pushed you in that direction? The thought process in terms of like, actually, I'm going to go down this route.
Well, I think I was listening too much to the voices outside of me. So it was the sensible thing to do. It was the more risk-averse thing to do. The one of the things I thought about studying was art. And that was a bad idea according to everybody because, you've got to make money as an artist. It's not an easy career choice. There were a couple of things like that. And I think I was going along with the tide. And I had a lot of friends studying business. And like I said, it hasn't been wasted. It's a very good generalist grounding in understanding systems, and it's been foundational, I think, to building my career. But I've found the love of what I do in other places since then. And I've gone on to go and study different things, and I've changed careers along the way. So it's been an amazing journey of discovery, of rediscovering myself and of discovering what else there is out there. And of, finding that self-belief to go out there and do what you really want to be doing and what you love.
Was there a defining moment? Like, did you have an aha kind of moment, or was it evolved over time that you wanted to kind of go in this other direction that you're kind of going in now?
Yeah, I think I've had a couple of defining moments, and some of them have been really sharp sort of phases, and some of them have been more gentle evolutions. I think the first very clear turning point for me was when I had finished studying and I was working in financial services, and I really wasn't enjoying it. But I kind of thought, well, I had lots of, contemporaries who also had studied finance and accounting and who weren't loving their first jobs. And I think we all sort of thought, well, this is just the way life is, right? There were upsides to working, getting paid and, building new networks and so on. But it was really when I started meeting people doing what I was doing who loved what they did that something started, the penny kind of dropped.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, like there's something going on here. I mean, it sounds crazy with the benefit of hindsight, that I hadn't really considered an alternative. But that really was the spark that triggered me to go and find something that I really felt more passionate about.
You kind of hear strategy put on lots of different things now, like kind of as this thing that we should all be doing. We all want to kind of be focusing on strategy. You've obviously had it as like a key job. Like if you were to describe because you were the chief strategy officer, like if you were to kind of describe that role, how would you describe it?
That's a good question. I think the most important role of strategy actually is to create understanding. So, it's often helping the clients distill down to what really is the problem that we're trying to solve or the opportunity that we're trying to take advantage of. It's then explaining the client's business and the category and the industry dynamics in a way that creative teams can understand and feel inspired by. And then it's also working with the creative directors to help them best express their ideas and pull out the seeds of why something is really appropriate and is really going to connect with the intended audience. And so it's getting everybody on the same page in a way that's coherent and simple. In many ways, there's a lot of parallels, I think, between being a good strategist and being a good coach, because you're really helping people express what they're wanting to express in a way that perhaps creates a new perspective.
Nice.
One of the lows. And that was when I took on a role that wasn't right for me. And that was a really interesting, it was a hard experience. And it wasn't the right role for me for a number of reasons. I think I took on, it was a leadership role running a small independent agency. And I think there was a misalignment of expectations. I think there were issues in the work that we were doing that were tricky. There was a bit of a misalignment between how the agency was positioned and the type of work that we did. And I think I got lost somewhere in the middle of it all. And to be honest, just didn't have the tools and at that stage the maturity in my leadership development to manage it and to manage the pressures of it. And I felt, I think, at the time, very unsupported in it. So there were a kind of a whole confluence of factors that came together to make it a very difficult experience, but one that I think I learned a lot from, because I learned where my strengths lie, the type of roles that do suit me, the collaborative sort of culture and environment that I want to work in, the type of work that I love doing. So there was lots that came out of it. That zone of growth that is, you want to be pushing yourself and stretching yourself, because that's how you grow and that's how you expand. But when you push it too much, it's the zone of kind of stress and injury.
Yeah.
And it's actually unconstructive. It can really take you several steps back. And I think I ended up several steps back in my confidence after that. But that was just one part of the journey, right? It was a good, as I said, learning opportunity and a good provocation to move on and find something else. So I did.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
yeah,
quite a good indicator, though, isn't it? Like that, when you're saying about I've been pushed too far, when you feel like you're maybe in a state of panic or like higher anxiety, look, putting yourself out of your comfort zone is difficult and it does feel uncomfortable. But I think the moment that you flip over into like panic is like a key indicator to yourself that maybe this isn't right.
definitely. And I think we all have our individual personality styles and we respond
Mm,
differently under pressure. So my natural style is to sort of go inward and to
mm,
disengage a little bit. And I think, now having done the development work that I have and understanding more of ways to approach different situations, I think if I'd reached out and drawn assistance from other people and other areas, it may have been a very different story. But I think ultimately it wasn't the right role or the right business for me.
mm. It takes quite a lot of bravery, I think, though, to reach out at moments where you think that you're struggling,
Mm.
um, or being overly challenged about something. I think particularly maybe earlier on, actually, I think at any stage of your career, actually, because there are different expectations. Maybe when you're later on and more senior, there are different expectations versus when you're more junior and at the earlier stages of your career. I think it's a difficult thing to reach out in times of need, isn't it? And expose yourself and feel vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it definitely. And I think especially when you're in a leadership position, it can be quite lonely
Mm,
because you can't really go to the next layer down. And if you're not connecting with a CEO, for example, then you need to go externally, and that can be quite challenging to be vulnerable enough to admit that you need help. Um, and yet, often, as we know, it's easier said than done, but vulnerability is often the doorway to really growing and connecting and being stronger. I've done so much striving. I've really consistently taken on far too much, and thought that I enjoyed it. And I did to an extent, but the problem with all the striving is that you stop appreciating where you are right now.
mm,
And it is just exhausting. It's a shortcut to burnout. And I think, we celebrate the ideal of living a balanced life so much, but it's almost a bit of a toxic ideal of balance where you are delivering at work or needing to deliver at work like you only work, and needing to deliver at home as if you don't have a job, and needing to be as fit as someone who can have all the spare time to exercise as much as they need to,
yeah.
and so on and so on. And so, we set ourselves these impossibly high standards in every area of our life as if we're living all of these things in parallel, rather than as if we're living them all in one integrated life. And it's not to say you need to compromise on any of your priorities, but for me, this sort of looking at things in a more integrated fashion and understanding that there really are trade-offs that you need sometimes to make. And there are priorities that on some days will get more attention, and on other days, other priorities will get more attention. And toning down the perfectionism, I suppose, is another way of describing it.
Yeah. That point you said about trade-offs, I think, is interesting. Is there are there things now that you happily trade off, like kind of that you maybe wouldn't have before?
So definitely, I think now being productive in the work context sits in its rightful place alongside some of the other things I need to do in my life. Whereas for a long time, I think everything else played second fiddle, including myself. But really where I've arrived at is that the best way to be productive and to make your biggest contribution is to first look after yourself and to look after kind of your nest, your grounding, those around you. And from that sort of healthy, grounded, connected space, you have actually much more capacity to be productive in a business setting.
It's so hard though, I think, isn't it? It's just as society and organizations, like you were saying before, even like wire people to kind of, we say that like there's lots of messages around like looking after your well-being and all of those kind of things, but breaking some of those patterns of behavior that we fulfill every day and we see other people fulfilling, so we're more likely to like kind of self-fulfill them as well. It's certainly I don't think anybody's particularly found that entire balance. So almost a piece of work in itself.
Very much so. And I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg, because it's hard for individuals to do when the system is still reinforcing that this is the way you do things. You've got to be in online meetings from morning till night, and then when do you actually get the work done? And then you've got everything else in your life that you've got to fit in. So it's, again, one of those things that's a lot easier to say than to do. So, sometimes the best that one can do is work in just 2 minutes to calm down your nervous system in the middle of it all. So, it's finding those little moments where you can kind of restore and replenish, and to just understand that sometimes it isn't going to be possible. And that's part of kind of living in a more integrated fashion as well. Not every day is going to be perfectly balanced. In fact, most days won't be balanced at all. But as long as in the bigger picture over a week or a month, you're managing to get to what you need to be getting to, or you are managing to consistently return to yourself in the middle of not getting to everything, that's the best that I think we can all hope to do.
It's like zooming out a bit, isn't it? And kind of realizing what's going on rather than just being in that frantic kind of state of fulfilling things.
It's that zooming out which is so helpful, and that's what I find the mindfulness can do for me, and what coming back into the body actually can do for me. So, sometimes when you're feeling overwhelmed, or when I'm feeling overwhelmed and there's so much happening and you just don't know where to turn next, you just really stop when you most feel like you can't stop and do 5 minutes of yoga or a little bit of stretching outside in, the fresh air. Sometimes I come back and it's enough of a perspective shift to realize, I can prioritize slightly differently. There's something I can delegate to someone else, or there's, this actually doesn't need to be taking this length of time. And it's really hard to do that, to pull ourselves out of the busyness, I suppose, when you're in the thick of it. But it's really helpful if you can manage to do it.
I suppose it's also just finding the things. Obviously, for you, you've kind of mentioned your yoga practice, and I know that you've gone on to do teaching as well, which I think is amazing. One of the things that I do is I run, um, and I also do Zumba, and I do them for different things. Like running makes me think, like kind of it's I'm in a world of my own, and I kind of process kind of stuff. And Zumba um, actually is I can't think like kind of it's the only time of the week that I do it a few times a week, but it's the only time whereby you actually literally have to focus on the thing at hand because the steps are really quick and all of that. So I have to be really present and it kind of quietens down my brain a bit. So I think it's about trying to find in whatever form it is, those things that you can quieten down your brain and you can kind of process things. And like you said, find those moments that give you a bit of a release as well.
I think what you're touching on is so important because there's some things that will help the mind and some things that are about the body. The
Mm,
other two that I would add is if you have a practice that engages the heart, what do you love to? Sometimes it's the same
mm,
as one of the others. So
yeah,
that's great. If one thing you do, yoga for me ticks multiple boxes.
yeah,
And then something that helps you process as well. So a shadow practice, journaling. Journaling is pretty fundamental to my life as well. Um, so it's about finding those things that really pull you into different spaces so you can get those different perspectives, body, heart, mind, shadow, and yeah, they keep me sane anyway.
no, definitely. Um, just thinking about the kind of your career journey, the question I have is, do you think it's like you've earned kind of almost a state of privilege now, or in a position of privilege, to be able to kind of create these practices for yourself and create the space and like kind of actually how difficult would that have been much earlier on in your kind of career, given that we talked about societal pressures and organizational structures and reinforcing the way that you work? Do you think that kind of privilege has almost come with time and experience?
I would say so. I think for people at a more junior level in organizations, it can be very tough because you've got
Mm,
to live up to everyone else's expectations about what you should be delivering and how things should be, how you should be working, when you should be working, where you should be working. Um, and there's a very harmful narrative, I think, that I've heard quite often about, oh, well, in our day, we had to work all weekend,
yeah,
particularly in the creative industry. And there's often an impatience with some of the younger talent that's coming into the industry who, to their credit, are not putting up with it and do set boundaries and do prioritize their own wellness. And I think it's fantastic. I think the a lot of corporate culture is long overdue an overhaul, and there's this false dichotomy between um, prioritizing your own wellness and prioritizing the thriving of the business, because really the two go hand in hand. And the more thriving the individuals within a business are, the more likely a business is to thrive itself.
mm,
So I think that there's an interesting shift happening. I think we are seeing a lot of businesses trying to prioritize wellness, trying to do things differently. But there's a lot of stickiness of old paradigms. Um,
yeah. We've gone from a more maybe traditional kind of career path where you've built your kind of way up working for other people, then into the space of owning your own business and entrepreneurship. Has the definition of success for you kind of changed over time?
It's definitely changed. So, I think in my early years, I was very driven by external affirmation of success. So it was promotions, it was um, awards potentially, it was clients and colleagues just feeding back, in a positive
Yeah.
way. But now I think, all of that stuff is great. But success for me now is much more about the quality of my experience in everyday life. Am I loving what I'm doing? Am I feeling relatively grounded and balanced in what I'm doing? Am I getting to, at least to a degree, to all the important priorities in my life? There's a more, there's more of a gentleness to what I see as success now. I think it's become more about way of being than about things that you need to be doing. I think it's partly though, it's partly a privilege, right? To be in that space where you can design your life to the extent that I'm able to, and to focus on the experiences and so on. That's the legwork that I've done over the previous sort of 2 decades has definitely helped me get to this space. But it's my ideas of success have definitely changed over time.
Yeah, because I think it's like almost that everything that you're taught kind of throughout your career and the way that even organizations are set up, the organizational structures teach you about kind of these reward comes from, like you're saying, these promotions or kind of pay increases or like external feedback, and making that switch to it kind of being more intrinsic, I think must have been taking a lot of work to do. Powerful.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
you talked about kind of like almost building confidence in your career and like kind of helping and confidence to kind of go and like get the things that you want to work on and like kind of be more purpose driven. And I think that takes a lot of confidence to be able to do that. But also like working with clients and navigating our careers almost takes quite a lot of confidence. Like you've done is moved from all of these different sectors into like now doing your own practice. Um, how do you help your clients build like that confidence and resilience?
So I think there are a number of avenues into that. Um, developing a strong sense of one's own purpose and voice is a great starting point. So really understanding what excites you, what drives you, what is the common thread sometimes that's taken you from where you were to where you are now. That starts telling you what you really want to stand up for and what directions you want to move in, but also what strengths you've got. What is your unique offering to the world? So really developing a strong sense of what's meaningful for oneself is important. And then really understanding where one's strengths are and playing to those. I think understanding also, with reference to what we were talking about earlier with the comfort zone, is to know where to push yourself and when to go gently on yourself. So I think it's important to normalize the experience of lacking confidence in certain areas, because when we're learning something new and when we're stretching ourselves, we'd be very narcissistic if we just felt completely confident all the time.
Yeah.
It's a natural part of learning and growth. So sometimes just to be reminded of that is reassuring enough to take the pressure off a little bit. This doesn't have to be perfect. This is the first time I'm doing something. And that also helps to open the door to think, okay, well, who in my network can I tap into for support on this? Well, how is the system structured so that I can, so that it will support me, and where isn't it going to support me, and what can I do about that? And just inviting a more gentle holding of oneself and holding more lightly of the process of growth, I think, is important. And then the other important component is to manage one's own, I think, nervous system arousal in the moment, because I think feeling a bit wobbly in one's confidence can also then heighten anxiety and make an experience feel quite stressful. And I think some of the mind-body tools that I work with can be really helpful to just bring that sort of sympathetic arousal of the nervous system back down into a more restful state. And then you're able to move, just with a more grounded sort of confidence. And understanding different people's personalities and styles. I work a lot with my clients on using the Enneagram, understanding what are their sort of primary motivations, what are their patterns of behavior, what happens for them when they're not feeling so confident, and how do we work with that so that they can choose differently and then arrive in a different place feeling differently.
Yeah. I think those tools are really interesting to kind of, like you said, almost like going back to earlier in your career, like what's the difference between the expectations people have versus what your own actual expectations are, or your own behaviors, or your own like kind of state, rather than what everybody else maybe thinks that you should or shouldn't be doing. Be quite empowering.
Yeah, I keep coming back to that growth mindset. There's such a, there's lots of lovely literature on it. And sometimes one just needs a reminder that maybe you are holding yourself to a perfectionist standard when really you should be holding yourself to a beginner standard, at least for this first week of doing something new.
Yeah, true. You mentioned your like people using their network. How important has your network been in your career?
It's been hugely important, and at the same time, I don't think I've nurtured it as much as I could have. And I think it's been one of the gaps possibly in what I've done. That said, I've had remarkable people that I've worked with who've sort of tracked careers with as I've gone, who've often opened the door to different roles in different businesses. My very first job, I think I got through a recruitment agent, and since then it's all been through the network. And I think it's been really powerful to have the support of certain key clients and certain key, more senior leaders as I've gone. And I would definitely encourage anybody else on their journeys to really focus in on building and expanding your network, because a lot of business and a lot of progress is to do with relationships.
Yeah. We quite often say in Uplift Her now that we think careers are 50% based on developing your skills and 50% based on developing your network. But as organisers, when you sit within an organisation and you think about the way that they do career development and they do like kind of the delightful performance reviews and stuff like that, it's almost like we miss half of what is actually going to make your kind of career successful, because we don't focus on that networking part. We don't really value that maybe until you're in a position that actually you need it, and almost that's a bit too late. So the more that we can do around that networking, and like you said, it's not just about kind of getting the next job. It's also about helping you develop yourself, your confidence, like kind of having a support, lots of different things that actually help you kind of navigate your own career better, really.
Mm, mm. Yeah, if the one thing that people take out of my story is that, it's life is a very messy but beautiful journey if you just keep following what's unfolding, and reconnecting with yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, I have loved our conversation. I really appreciate the insights you shared and the journey that you've kind of gone on and sharing that with us today.